Sorry, I'm trying to see that. Lisa, I'm not sure about the brightener. I'm gonna have to, I'll come back and answer that question. But the Caswell plating, sorry for the blurry image there, it's what they have on their website. They sell kits, but then they also sell the kind of things broken down, and you can purchase everything all separate. So their kit contains the copper sulfate crystals, which that's the copper copper salts that make up the majority of the bath. And then they have their brightener broken down into two parts. It's a part A and a part B. So their kit is the copper sulfate crystals and 2 brighteners. I think this kit is 1.5 gallon. It'll make 1.5 gallons of solution, and it's right at $50 for that quantity. You still need to provide the distilled water and sulfuric acid, which is part of the mix. And their website gives you the exact info on how much water and acid. Most people, if you're making a bath at home that you're not getting like the Rio solution that already has the acid in it, you can purchase sulfuric acid at auto parts store just as like battery acid replacement. And then like a really DIY way to make your own bath is to use Zep Root Kill, which I actually have some here. So you can get this stuff at Home Depot or hardware store. It is the straight copper sulfate crystals. I think like 2 pounds of this is like right around $15 probably. And then this is the actual like recipe for making basically a gallon of solution for using the Zep Root Kill. So your gallon of distilled water, again using battery acid as your sulfuric acid that you're adding to the mix. And then you do have to, if you want your copper to be shiny, you have to purchase a brightener. So that you can, you could purchase the brightener from Rio, or you could purchase it from Caswell, like separate from the kit. With setting up a bath, you would want to have some sort of plastic container that your solution is kept in. Once I stop sharing the PowerPoint, I'll show you like the containers that I've got. You're going to heat the water to boiling on a stovetop in another container that's not going to ever come in contact with. Okay, and yeah, Erin says $15.95 for the brightener. So yeah, you're gonna heat the water, like you can have a tea kettle or something like that. Heat your water to boiling. Pour it over the crystals in your plastic container. Stir that up so that it's really good and dissolved. And then you're gonna add your battery acid and your brightener to that mixture, and then you're ready to go. One thing that like just in the basics of setting this up, you can use the solution warm. Some people actually add, for their baths, they'll have like an aquarium. Oops, sorry about that. They'll have like an aquarium heater or something like that. You can also add agitation to your baths to help. But you don't necessarily need it. You can do all of this without those things. And then just a little talking about the kind of stages. This is a really cheesy image that I found, but it's a good kind of just looking at the stages of the process. So depending on what your what you're wanting to grow your metal over is going to kind of determine the some of these stages. You know, you can electroform wax, you can electroform like plastic objects, you can electroform over natural materials, and you can electroform over other metal forms. But if you're electroforming over like natural materials or something that's porous, you need to seal that object before you paint it with the conductive paint, or before you actually prep it to be electroformed. If you don't have a good seal on that natural object, and you put your conductive, well, basically, like, so you're, sorry, let's say you sealed your object. Your next step is to paint your object with a conductive paint, and that paint is going to have like particles of metal in it that are going to cause the current to flow through the piece and cause the metal to start growing over the surface. You know, so you're going to paint your piece with the conductive paint, and then you're going to put it in your bath and you're going to let it grow. Sandra, do you have a question? I'm trying to get you unmuted.
I never heard of the graphite paint.
Yeah. So there's now I'm like blanking on her name. She's the Sherry Paul. Is that right? She sells like also entire electroforming kits, and she's got it's a particular like graphite paint, but you can also get this is like total ground carbon conductive paint that and I'll show all of this the stuff that I'm using as well, like once I stop sharing the screen.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah, but there are that carbon paint, I think I got it from McMaster-Carr. Yeah, so some people really like particular brands of conductive paint, and I'll talk about that a little bit. But so kind of going on, once you get it painted with the conductive paint, you put it in the bath, and if it's a good coating, that's when your metal will start growing. Sherry Hobb, yes, thank you. Like stepping back and saying, if you have not sealed, if you want to grow metal over a natural form, and you have not created a good seal, the porosity of that, like say like a natural like seed pod or something like that, the liquid in the bath is going to get into that object. It's going to start like causing that object to swell. It's going to break down the whatever sealant that you were using, which in turn is going to break down the conductive paint. And then once your conductive paint is broken down, then you're not going to be getting like a good current flowing through your piece. And then that's one of the main reasons that things won't grow, especially if you're doing like a natural object. So you really, really, really want to seal anything that is porous in any way, like with some sort of like shellac or varnish or like polyurethane or something like that, that's going to create a really solid coat over the piece, and make sure to give time to let things dry. I'm going to keep moving on. So just a couple of in-process images too. this is an artist that, here's a finish piece, Studio Jardine on Etsy. But I like showing this image because what they're doing, they're applying, they're starting with like a copper ring band, and then they're building these like kind of crystal structures off of the ring band. And this white solution I'm going to show you all in a second, it's basically a mixture of super glue and baking soda that like creates almost like a cement. And that's how those crystals, those stones are held on there. You can, like I said, you can grow, growing or electroforming over something that is already metal, you don't have to paint that. The copper wire is it's gonna grow, and that's gonna actually kind of help in these rings. It's going to help kind of move the current through the piece. So the part that needs to be painted is going to be the like this white part and a little bit up onto the stone to kind of create a bezel. You know, you can again, you can build things out of wax. You could have an entire object that's like carved out of wax. You can combine, you know, metal with natural objects and kind of create your own hybrid forms. And then, you know, it's going to be about like how you're connecting connecting these things to the bath to get the current flowing. So just a few images of electroforming in the field. So, you know, of course, like Stanley Lexton is kind of the godfather of electroforming you know, working with it in the early 70s and really like pushing scale, creating these, and which is, you know, one of the exciting things about electroforming is being able to make things that are large scale and hollow. June Schwartz, you know, basically taking thin sheet copper, folding it, treating it like in almost like a fabric type way, enameling on it and then putting it back into the bath so you can kind of see the way the electroform material kind of grows up where there's not other things that are acting as a resistance to the growth. And just a couple of pieces of hers. Maria Phillips kind of, you know, taking these combination of like some wax forms and some like natural objects, and you know, creating kind of a number of people creating kind of like hybrid objects. And these are also enameled on. Oops. Javon Asfalk. So these are also they're natural objects that are I believe they're very thinly plated. And then of course Jillian Moore, kind of creating kind of biological specimens through electroforming. This is much older work than she's doing now. Lisa, bring COVID-19 into this. Yeah. And I don't know if Rachel is actually here. She had said she was going to join. So Rachel Shimpock, I'm actually in honor of doing the electroforming talk. I'm wearing some of her earrings today, but she is actually taking real food, and so again, you know, she can talk seriously about sealing an object that has the potential to fall apart and really contaminate a bath. And, you know, so she is sealing those objects, electroforming them, and then enameling on them to, you know, get this like really lovely surface, kind of playing with like comfort and, you know, people's relationships to food, and also like putting a different meaning on wearing your food. So all of these things are taken from the actual object. Lauren Coleman, oops, sorry. Lauren Coleman, really, yeah, utilizing the electroforming process to then play with like fitting it into places on the body, and, you know, distorting and shifting the body, and even like the way that we kind of look at, you know, look at like facial, you know, facial expressions and things like that. And then Dennis Nahabitian, this piece, so, you know, again, talking about like how you can take, you can electroform over metal. So he's actually utilizing like wire mesh and building these really like beautiful kind of mathematical structures. And by electroforming them, then they're becoming strong and rigid. So like it's not a very thick growth, but it's enough to stabilize this form that wouldn't, you know, wouldn't be able to hold its shape otherwise. And then Tiffany Lee is also using the wire mesh, but letting it become much more kind of like nodule growth, and you know, obviously this has a kind of spider-like reference. Christina Glick is another artist who's kind of going back and forth between enameling and electroforming, so that the electroforming growth kind of comes up through the layers, and kind of highlight some of those linear elements. Stephanie Tomczyk. So, you know, again, just really being able to push scale, push like surface quality, and things like that with electroforming. Liz Steiner, again, you know, was doing these kind of, there's a couple of people that are doing these kind of larger stone-like forms. Again, being able to really push scale and have things be lightweight and hollow so that they're not, you know, totally just like weighing you down. And then she was working with salt, the image on the left. So kind of utilizing the copper to create a reaction. And that's where that blue is coming from. Aaron Flongman. So again, kind of, I think those are actually potatoes that are grown, with metals grown over. So again, really like pushing scale, letting things be able to be kind of large, and you know, looking at like this like food object that could be turned into something else. And Gemma Draper also just, these pieces are really like pushing scale, combining electroforming and enameling. And I think that is it on that. So I'm going to stop sharing the screen. Okay. So, so I'm going to just show y'all. Nope. So I'm just going to show y'all kind of some of the situations that I've got set up here. So I mentioned the digital rectifier that you can get off of eBay. And I don't have it running just yet, but I'm gonna get that going in just a minute. And then I've got 2 sizes of baths here. You know, really like using a plastic container is fine. This larger square or rectangular sized bath is you can get like these kind of like the hard plastic like food storage containers from like restaurant supply or Restaurant Depot or something like that. Is a great place to get containers. And then the smaller container is just like a takeout container. You know, so those are both like are going to give me plenty of space to do the scale of you know, jewelry items. And then I'm gonna try and like hold my computer up and not drop it in the situation. So so just so you can see going across the top of this bath, so there is I've basically just taken a U of copper wire, stretching over, and it's just kind of bent over the ends. And I've got electrical tape holding things in place just so that, you know, just so that it's not going to move around, but it's basically just bent over the end. And it's just curving across the front. And then the bar on the center, so again, this is my my anode bus bar, and this is my cathode bus bar. And so it's always going to be that my the best way that I know to think about this is so like my feeder metal, the metal that is the sacrificial material to the bath, is going to be on the anode. My piece is going to be on the cathode because the anode is positively charged, the cathode is negatively charged. And I just want to remember that my piece that I'm growing is greedy. Like I want it to always be the thing that's taking from the rest of the bath. And what I've got going on in here for my anodes are just copper pipe. So I've just cut them into sections, and I've got like other copper wire that's feeding through that, and kind of it's like feeding through the bottom and looped up, and then that's feeding over top and like sitting on that that crossbar. All of these things, like as I'm prepping my bath and throughout me using it, I'm gonna periodically have to like scrub these clean. I want them to start clean, so they've been like sanded so that they're clean. But the bars themselves, the wire that's gonna hold it to the bar, they're gonna get corroded just from you know, just natural oxidation and just the kind of you know, just from the bath, that like fumes. Not that there's like noticeable fumes or anything, but just from the, you know, it rising up past the wire, there's going to be corrosion that sometimes happens on this. So you periodically have to like scrub that to clean that off, because again, if there's corrosion in the way of this, you know, these things touching, then you're not going to get a good flow of your current. You can also, in the smaller one, it's just a coil of wire that's wrapped around in there. And then when I'm putting things into this, I can't just put a piece of another piece of copper wire or something going across here, because if I have the positive and the negative touch, then I'm closing the circuit and I'm not going to, it's not going to plate. So what I have to go across my smaller bath is just a chopstick that's going to lay across. And I'll show you when I get this in here, like the way I'm attaching my piece to this, and then connecting it to the rectifier. Nothing touches that that bar, that chopstick. So that is kind of the simple way that I got things set up. You can also, you know, I think like if you look at Rio or you look at Caswell, when they talk about their copper anodes that they're supplying, it's just like 20 gauge sheet copper. There are some electroforming supply companies, like Technics is a very large electroforming supplier that usually just, I mean, they mainly supply institutions and larger industry. And their anodes are, and it's what we have in our bath in the studio, but their anodes are like giant bars that are really, really thick. And they're phosphorized copper, because sometimes you'll find with just using the copper pipe or copper sheet, you'll get more like sludge and contaminant that's coming through your bath. It just means that you might need to filter your bath more, but it's not really like an issue. And you know, you can kind of see these bars that are hanging in this bath have these little sleeves on them. It's a material, like a felt that's that you can get at like pond supply or aquarium supply companies, and they're basically just like folded and hot glued together, and then they just slip over the copper. And again, that just kind of helps to keep the sludge out of the bath. Lisa, did I answer your question about the smaller round? What's the feeder? And I'm gonna get there once I get things in the bath too. Yeah, let me just, I'll show you in just a second. So I've got a number, you know, of course we're kind of limited on time. I can't go like really in depth in a lot of like the model making process and things like that, but I've got a range of items here that have either been electroformed or are ready to be electroformed. So, you know, again, sometimes, you know, starting from like a carving wax or something like that, or a soft wax. You know, this object has been painted, but this was sheet wax that then a stone is set on there, and it's already started. The conductive paint has been painted. So the paint is going up over the edge of the stone, and that's going to create the bezel. You know, there are some natural objects like shells, which this was like a combo. This has been grown, but this is a shell that was built off of a like sheet wax structure. And then there's some, you know, some funky like plastic pieces. So again, like my plastic item doesn't have to be sealed. It can go, once it's painted, it can go into the bath. But, you know, and wax, like wax does not have to be sealed. It can just be painted with the conductive paint. Like seed pods, you know, anything that you think has the potential to break down in a bath. Jim's asking if if you can solder the core material, if it's removed and handle the, yeah. So the electroform metal does behave differently than your typical like machined copper or something like that. And there's a couple things you have to keep in mind if you want to solder on something afterwards. So yeah, so you gotta, if you want to melt out your interior material, you really have to be aware of actually how thick a growth you've got on your model. Sometimes you might pull something out of the bath and you're like, oh yeah, that, I mean, like this has been, it has this like stone set in there. You can see the, so I'm gonna call, like anytime I'm working with this, I'm gonna call like the thing that's connecting is a lead wire. And you can see from where the original wire was, how much growth is on that now. And I can use that to figure out like how much growth is on my piece. Sometimes it's not necessarily consistent, like depending on sometimes the way that the current flows, you're going to get more growth on like exterior points than you are on like things that are in like interior crevices and stuff. So you're not necessarily going to say, oh, well, this is this thickness, it's that thickness everywhere. But it can give you a guide. But you, so yeah, if you try and melt out, if you melt out your material, you want to make sure that the growth that you've got on the piece is enough that it's going to create a still a strong form. That being said, you can always put things back in, like this was an iris pod, and I'm gonna actually put it in the bath. But so the pod has been burned out, and it's a pretty thin growth right now. It's still connected to a lead wire. I can put it back in and grow it longer if I want. If I want to solder on it, then it's going to, if it's too thin, it might melt a section or something like that. But like this one has had a wire soldered to it. Like the main difference is that because the electroform material is very porous. And so it's kind of similar to soldering on cast metal sometimes, in that you'll, when you're soldering, the solder will wick into the surface, and you'll be like, where'd it go? Where'd it go? My piece isn't connected, but there's, the solder has pulled into the surface of the metal. So kind of similarly to cast metal, like before I solder on electroform material, I'll take a burnisher and really burnish down the area that I want to solder to, and that'll help ensure that it's like the pores of the metal are closed. So before I put anything in the bath, I'm gonna just talk about the conductive paints a little bit. So, again, there are a variety of brands and different things that people use. So silver is more conductive than copper. So there is silver conductive paint that some people really feel is, it just gives you a better, a better path through your material. Rio sells this silver conductive paint. It is lacquer based, so it is like harder to clean up, but it is going to give you a really good seal, or a really good coating on the material. I haven't found, I mean, because it's silver, it's going to be more expensive. Again, I feel like for this 1 ounce container, I feel like it was somewhere around $40 or $50 for for this. The copper conductive paint that I like is this company called Safer Solutions. They're based in Philly, and they sell their conductive paint. You can get by, I think they sell it in like 1 ounce, 2 ounce, 4 ounce, 8 ounce, and a pint. And I think the pint is $99 or something like that. Oops, I'm losing my. Can y'all hear me? Can y'all still hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good, thank you. I lost my speaker there for a minute. Yeah, so Safer Solutions, much cheaper. It's a water-based paint, so it's easier to clean up. It is, you know, yeah, you get like options for buying different sizes. And with these paints, you can thin them and use them distilled or you know, a little thinned, so that you can make it last longer. It also is going to give you the ability to like have better coverage on like really fine things. And you know, so sometimes you know, you can kind of move your like small amounts and then store the distilled stuff in these other containers, so you're not like thinning the entire thing. And I will say, just to also to clarify, like when I was talking about the baths and using distilled water in your baths, I will say, like when we got our baths here, we calibrated the Technics like scientists or whatever they basically said that Baltimore tap water is actually really, really good for electroforming. So they, you know, they were like, you don't have to use distilled water. Just use tap water, because everything that's in Baltimore tap water is actually, you know, it doesn't affect the growth and is actually good for it. But some other people definitely feel very strongly, and depends on where you live, about always using distilled water when you're mixing up your baths, and when you're painting your models, when you're cleaning your brushes. Everything is distilled water. So I'm also really quickly, I'm going to talk about just like connecting my wire. So I've got just thin, I think this is just like 20 gauge wire. The super glue baking soda situation is the thing that I think is the is a really neat trick that makes kind of this, it makes kind of a cement that then is really, really just, you know, it's strong. It's a good way to bond things to your wire, to each other. There we go. So I'm just putting a little bit of the super glue on my wax paper. I'm always working on wax paper to keep things clean. And then I'm gonna just dump a little bit of the baking soda in there. And I'm not even gonna mix it up right now. I'm just gonna try and connect this to my, oops, it's already hardened. I don't wanna touch that. So, you know, some folks might be like, well, why don't you just stick the stick the wire into the wax. Sometimes you will, I can do that, but then, okay, so I just put the super glue right on top, and then I'm gonna pour the baking soda on there, try that. Because it hardens up so fast. Yep. So yeah, so I could put the wire into the wax, but then the wax is soft, and as I'm painting this, or as I'm putting it in the bath, like every time it gets jostled, if that wax kind of opens up, it gets looser, then it's going to like decrease the connection that I have, and then that's where I'm going to have problems. So this like super glue connection, the baking soda is just like, again, it's kind of creating this like, it's just hardening it and creating more of a paste. So that's kind of set up there. You can also, I mean, depending on what you're doing, you could bond something with epoxy, like 5-minute epoxy. Sometimes you can use super glue. Sometimes you can use hot glue, but you know, obviously you can't use hot glue on something that is going to melt. So I just want to kind of be aware of what my what things that I'm trying to connect. Oop.
April, can you tilt your screen down just a little so we can see what you're doing?
Yeah, thank you. So again, I'm just adding a little bit more. I'm like adding a little super glue and the baking soda mixture to that, and kind of covering that wire. Wherever my wire is connected, like whether I'm sometimes you can wrap, like, you know, that's just well, I think initially, I don't know if y'all can see in there, the wire was just glued kind of on the inside of the iris pod. But then now because I'm regrowing it, I've just like wrapped the wire really, really tightly around the other wire. Sometimes I can just like, I can take wire, got a little bit of extra here. This is a piece, this is like plastic, like aquarium plant, and it was grown, but sometimes you can kind of, I don't know if y'all can see this, there are spots where the metal didn't grow. You can see the plastic underneath. That's sometimes you'll just find that like you thought you had a really good coverage with your paint, and you did not. So with this, I'm just taking the wire and wrapping it around the end, and that's enough of a connection. You know, I'm gonna skip because we're coming down to the end, but there's also like the order that I do things in. Sometimes you can, like I tend to like to connect my lead wire to my model first and then paint the object, because it gives me something to hold on to when I'm like drying, letting the paint dry. I can like hang it somewhere. It just like is easier for me to like hold on to, so I'm not touching the object. But you could paint your piece with conductive paint first and then attach your lead wire. You can kind of go back and forth a little bit, you know, whatever you need to do to get that connected. And then, so I have a couple pieces. that were painted already. And this one went into the bath a little bit. But, you know, again, quickly before just talking about the paint, whenever I'm using it, it is actually metal embedded, you know, like kind of held in a binder. And that's what makes it conductive. So you really, 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 really need to mix it up really well. You know, whether it's shaking, really, really mixing to make sure that you get the metal like throughout the piece. And so sometimes, again, when you are when you're having issues with like a piece not growing everywhere, it's probably that the metal was kind of separated out in the paint. So I'm just gonna very, very quickly like paint over the surface. And the copper paint, it looks this really dull orange. You also like make sure that you're actually using a nice brush when you're painting your paint on, because if you're using a crappy brush that's losing bristles, they're gonna be in that surface. The electroforming takes all the detail. That's also why having it be a little thinned out is good, because it's gonna give you it's better to do kind of multiple thin coats than to glop it on, because you're gonna get kind of all of that detail. So with this, you know, this wax form, I definitely am gonna have to do multiple coats on this, because you can kind of see that there's like some of that purple coming through, but I can't really keep painting on it. I'm not gonna paint the back, and then the metal's only gonna grow on the front. What I do wanna do is I wanna paint up my lead wire just a little bit, about like 1/2 inch or so. And that's gonna just ensure that I have a good connection where that's growing. If I'm gonna let that sit, generally, I always tell my classes, like, I mean, that's a water-based paint. It's gonna dry pretty quickly, but in like, if you're having to seal a natural object, if you're painting on these things, I would overly err on the side of caution of letting things dry for like several hours, just to ensure that there is no chance that your paint is going to start to break down in the bath. You know, if you're rushing, then you're gonna ultimately, you put it in there wet and it starts to break down, then it's going to be in the bath not growing, and then you're just wasting time. So it's better to like take your time, let it let it dry thoroughly, and then put it in when it's totally done. If I had something that had missing spots or something and it had grown a little bit, I can come back and I can paint over those areas. I could even paint over the entire thing again and then put it back in the bath, and it'll grow. And then, yeah, again, Sandra had asked about the carbon paint. So yeah, this Total Ground stuff just got at McMaster-Carr, through McMaster-Carr, and it's a carbon paint. So carbon is conductive, and some people really, really like that over the copper or over the silver. One of the things that people, I think a pro of the carbon or even the silver is that one of the hardest things with the copper conductive paint is that when the metal starts growing, sometimes you can't see that it's not growing in a place because it's growing copper and the paint is copper color as well. but it's a different sheen. Mary Beth's asking, does the sealant have to be water-based? If I'm sealing a natural object, you can use water-based sealants. However, like things like, it depends on sometimes on the object that you're sealing, but the things that are like having a really, really sturdy, really good seal with something like a shellac or a varnish it's just going to ensure that nothing breaks down. So I tend to want to stick with those. I tried, for years I was using, Mod Podge makes a hard coat Mod Podge that it actually, like, the more you use it, it also stiffens the material. It's water-based. It will work, but you really have to be patient and let it dry and do multiple layers. Okay, so I'm gonna just show y'all getting things into the bath, and then we should have maybe. It's going a little long today. I hope people can stick around just for a few minutes. So I am putting on gloves because this is like mild acid. And so I don't know if you can see on the rectifier here. So my alligator clip's coming out. The black and red is negative. The red is positive. And I'm going to put this guy into the bath. So again, I want my positive to be going to the anode, to the where the copper pipes are hanging off. And then I do have that at a pretty good angle. Then I want my piece to be going off that center, and I want the negative attached to that. And I just want to be careful, like, I don't want to have this piece sitting, especially if it's just a painted object. I don't want it to be sitting in the solution without current running through it for any extended amount of time. So I'm going to put this in. It's just going to be like a few seconds before I get it hooked up and turned on. But just, you know, be aware of that. Like, you never want to like just let it sit in there, because then the acid will start breaking down the paint. And I mean, this piece has already got some growth on it. But I'm just going to lift this up and coil my wire around there. Some people, you know, so again, like as tight as I can get that on there, the better. Got that down in there. I'm gonna turn it on. And so I've actually got this. So right now, so the voltage again is constant, and I've got it set at 0.6 volts. I usually start out, also the nice thing about this is I can adjust fine or coarse. And I know that it's reading backwards for y'all, I'm sorry. But so now I've got it set at 0.3. Then when I connect the negative, my amperage is gonna go up. So, and
it's not backwards for us. We can read it fine.
Okay, good. Thank you. My screen, I was looking at it, was like, oh no. Yeah, so usually when I start out growing something, especially when it's paint and I've just put it in, I'm gonna start out somewhere around like 0.3 or 0.5 volts, like really, really low. I'm gonna I'm gonna adjust this a little bit. I'm gonna take it up to 0.5. And you can see the amperage is going up as I'm adjusting the voltage. The voltage is staying the same. The amperage is gonna go up. You know, again, the amperage is gonna be controlled by the size of the object, the size of the like that surface area, and by the voltage, by the pressure going through there. And that's me bumping in the table that's causing that to change. So this rectifier is really sensitive. So yeah, so I'm gonna keep it at 0.5 when I first start out growing, at least 15 minutes or so. And within that first 15 minutes, or after 15 minutes, I'm gonna pull it out and I'm gonna look at it and make sure that it's growing. Because if something's actually not, yeah, that's real sensitive. If something's actually causing like resistance in this line, if there's not a good connection, say I glued the lead wire into the piece and it broke loose and there wasn't actually a good connection flowing or something like that, or my paint was not good or something, like, you know, like my coverage was not good, I pull that out and I see that it's not growing, then I want to stop. I want to take it out. I want to paint it again, or I want to reassess the connection. Because again, if it's sitting in there and it's not growing, then it's just you're wasting time. And again, with the copper paint, it's hard sometimes to see the growth, but I don't know if y'all can see the difference between the copper paint is kind of this burnt orange color, and the metal, when it starts to grow, sorry, that's blurry. When the metal starts to grow, it's more of like a salmony pink. I don't know if you can see the difference side by side there. And even though like this growth isn't shiny, that has to do with the brightener. Again, you know, this is a grown piece and it's more pink. So so I want to look for that more salmony color. I want to look for you know, if I've got my brightener in my bath, I should have a good like sheen on the surface. I'm gonna just see if this, even in that amount of time, yeah. So I'm gonna, this is just distilled water. I'm gonna spray on the piece. So it just got much, much brighter, even in that short amount of time. So then I can, you know, once I know that it's growing, then I could even turn this up. Sometimes, like, you can take it up. I would say you want to stay under a volt. But like I could take it to a volt. Now my amperage is higher. And I would say, you know, it's like that. My amperage right now is half of what my voltage is. I don't do the math of figuring out like what the amperage should be. Like, you can control the amount of time that it's going to take for things to grow based on the voltage and the amperage. And I don't do that. But as long as I can see that I've, you know, that I've got, I mean, that like half of what the voltage is good. And as long as I can see that when I'm controlling the voltage, the amperage is changing and changing kind of consistently, that's good for me. I'm gonna, with the other bath and the chopstick, so I've just got the another piece that's just like coiled around the chopstick, and the chopstick is going to lay across the top and kind of be taped into place or held into place. and then same thing, I would connect my, my lead wires, or my, I would connect my lead wires to the alligator clamp. I would just clip to this thin copper wire. You know, the chopstick is doing nothing but holding that piece and just making sure that it's not, that there's no way that like copper wire is going to touch copper wire. So it's just kind of acting as a little bit of a like protector there. I don't want to leave that sitting in there without the ability to grow. So I'm just gonna take that out. Okay, and then usually, and so you can see even in the amount of time that's sitting here, the voltage is staying the same, the amperage has gone up. Can y'all see that? And it will continue to go up as the thickness of the metal grows in there. Does that make sense? So, okay. Does anybody have any questions? I know we went a little over. It's a lot to be like crash course in electroforming in an hour. And again, you know, it really, the amount of time that something is going to be in the bath is going to be determined by the how thick you ultimately want it to be, which you can, you know, again, you can do math and figure out the like surface area, and the you know, like figure out the surface area that you have, the thickness that you want, and then you can figure out the amount of time it's going to take. Thank you. But you can also, I mean, generally I'm going to leave things in for probably around 24 hours to get just a good decent growth on something. Again, I can always put things back in. You know, I can always, if I want to really be watching the whole process and just, you know, making sure that I'm not getting super nodule-y growth or something like that, then I need to, you know, I might want to all keep it at a much lower voltage the entire time that I'm growing and just make it go really, really, really slow. If I increase the voltage over a volt, you get like really, really intense nodule-y growth, like kind of how some of June Schwartz's images that I showed. So you can push that. The higher the voltage is, though, the metal can become unstable. So you know, you'll get like kind of this graininess that doesn't actually adhere to the surface. So, you know, you might have to find the balance of how quickly you can grow something or how much you can push it. But usually if you want something to be really nice and even, then you want to keep that at a pretty low voltage. What else? You also might find, and I just had this issue with a student who was using the Rio, I'll just warn y'all, like she was using the Rio electroforming solution, which, like I said, it's nice and easy because it is already pre-mixed. But regardless of the amount of brightener that she was adding, which, you know, you do have to add brightener to get depleted. But regardless of the amount of brightener, her growth was tending to, even though it had a bright surface, her growth had more of a grain to it. And that tends to be, you might have to come in and, I mean, you might have to filter your material or your solution periodically, which you can just run the solution through like a coffee filter multiple times. You'll get like kind of a copper sludge that will collect in the bottom of the container, and then that can just go in the trash. But the Rio solution seems like it tends to have a graininess to it in the growth. And there were a few students who were having problems like over a period of time with that same kind of solution. So, you might have to be prepared to filter a little bit more. You also, like I showed with these guys, you can create the little bags for holding your anodes. If you're doing this kind of situation where you've got the coil going in the center, you could actually, you could run a filter around the inside. You could also, depending on the size of your bath, you could have like a fish, like aquarium filter in the bath running while you're running the bath. You might have to have more space in the bath to be able to do that. But those are some problems that tend to come up in electroforming in some ways to deal with it. So does anybody have any other questions?
Yeah, can we see your earrings, please?
Oh, yes. Let me take off the gloves. Yeah, so these are some Rachel Shimpox chips. And these are they're not electroformed, they're rolled metal. So it's the one last chip and the crumbs at the bottom of the bag. So they're rolled like corrugated metal, and then they're electroplated. So and plating is just a thinner coating. Electroforming is thicker.
Love them. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anybody else have any questions? Actually, there's a question about how, if y'all can access, I did record this video. I missed the beginning of it, sorry. But it is recorded. If you would like a copy, just email us. We're putting the videos into Dropbox, and then we can share them that way. Okay, I think that's it. Any other questions? Thank you for your patience, and for, it went a little over. Everybody stuck around, that's good. And just a reminder that we're offering these classes or these Zoom sessions and stuff for free, but we are a small nonprofit. So if you feel compelled to donate, we'd greatly appreciate it. Thank you. And sign up for a class in June, Lisa. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks.